quite a bit, and I always have this rule when I go with somebody of a different culture and they go to feed me, I have to eat their food if they ask me. If they say, hey, you want to try some ... I have to eat it, and I have to be excited about it, and I'm not allowed to go ew in the process, okay? So my Korean friends all knew this, that if they took me out and they offered me something, I'd eat it. If they give me the option ahead of time, I'd be like, just so you know, wherever you take me, I'm going to eat what you give me, so be kind and generous, you know? And so there have been some times we've gone, and there was this soup bowl that was in the middle, and they're eating what I thought was noodles, but it turned out to be fish intestines, and he's like, went out of his way to be like, Scott, you don't have to eat that. I'm like, all right, I just got the okay, I don't have to touch it. But one of the weird foods that I never got a chance to try is, I think they call it fugu, or puffer fish. You know, puffer fish is this wonderful delicacy where it's supposed to be some of the best fish meat out there. You know, that's not really setting the bar very high, but one of the best kind of fish you can eat possible. But in order to prepare it, you need to cut it in such a way that you don't allow poison into the meat. I was reading up on this and learning about this, that the poison is actually this clear and I believe tasteless kind of poison that if you do release the poison into the meat, no one might ever know until after you've eaten it, you've digested it, and then next thing you know, you're sick and possibly even die from this poison. One chef that prepares this said that you have to go in an internship for like 10 years in order to start preparing and serving puffer fish. You know, the last few weeks we've been talking about these forgotten spiritual habits. And I've been talking a little bit about tradition and some of the beauty of tradition. And remembering that, listen, we're not the first ones to come up with what church looks like and our attempts to worship God. Like, we're not the first ones to try to figure this out. But listen, it could be very much like a puffer fish when we deal with tradition. And especially when we deal with some of these spiritual habits like fasting and this morning's Sabbath. That it can very easily go from being this beautiful, wonderful delicacy to poison. That could go from something that actually can bring you joy and delight and nourishment to something that could actually kill your faith. And so I say this in the very beginning, and I want you to hear this as we talk about these beautiful, delightful spiritual habits that we could be a part of. Do not forget to be careful. Be intentional when you deal with these things. Do not handle them as if they're just any old fish, but realize it's like a puffer fish. That when we do tradition, when we do spiritual habits, when we approach God in these unique, weirdly repetitive at times ways, that we don't allow it to become rote, but we remember why we do it. That we do it for a real reason. And because otherwise, once we start saying, you know what, I do this because God will love me more if I don't eat today, or God's going to love me more if I don't talk for a couple hours. You know, that's where I'm going to get his love from. And we start to switch and start thinking we got to do this rather than we get to do this. Right? I think a lot of times culturally we become reactionary to things, right? It's either I have to do it, or I don't do it, right? But within our walk with Christ, there's the I have to do it, I don't do it, I get to do it. Right? With fasting, like we talked about this last week and in the coming weeks, as we talk about these spiritual habits, remember this, you get to do it. We get to do it. And the second it becomes a burden, and the second that I go a day without food, and then I walk by my brother and I say, I see you're eating a burger, I guess you're not as holy as I am. Go eat something. Right away, go eat something. Go to the Chinese buffet and don't stop eating until you get it. Because that's not what this is about. This is about care and carefulness. And so this morning, as we talk about this beautiful topic, this thing that we can delight in, Sabbath, I want us to get why it's delightful. I want us to get why it's such an awesome delicacy that we can celebrate and enjoy together. And so, don't allow this to just be another check mark, another add-on to your faith to try to say, okay, I guess I'm good enough for God now. So I'm going to give you a simple, quick, super simple understanding of what Sabbath is, if this word means nothing to you. And then as we go forward, I want us to dive deeply into it. Sabbath keeping is this: the opportunity to set aside a day to remember God is God and I am not. It's an opportunity to set aside a day to say, I'm not God, but God is. And so I want to look at actually one of the first commands of the Sabbath. The first example of the Sabbath goes all the way back to creation. But one of the first commands, before even the 10 Commandments were laid out, there was this beautiful situation where God had freed his people, the Jewish people, out of the hands of Egypt, out of slavery. And he said, listen, come and I'm going to just move water out of your way. And when the water moves out of your way, you're going to walk on dry ground. And then when they try to walk on that water, I'm going to go boom, and then they can't follow you anymore. And you're going to be free, but guess what? When you're free, you're going to walk out, and you're going to look out, all of a sudden, it's a wilderness. And what's funny about the people of God, and I think this includes us, right, is God just did this amazing thing, and they're like, wow, this is wonderful. They take about like 10 to 20 steps, and they're like, the water over here is bitter. I want some tastier water, God, please. And so God's like, okay. So Moses, throw a log in the water and make it, and it'll make it sweet. And they drink. They're like, oh, God is so good. And then they go on another walk, and they're like, oh, I'm so hungry. There is no God. Oh, slavery was so much better. We used to eat all we wanted to eat in Egypt, and here we are stuck again. And it's in that context, in that situation where they're in the wilderness, they're walking along, and they're hungry for food. They're hungry for God to provide. And so God provides something kind of unique that maybe you've heard this word before, manna. And we're going to look at that. In Exodus chapter 16, if you have a Bible with you today, go to Exodus 16, starting verse 11. If you don't have a Bible, there's a Bible under most chairs, I'm going to start saying, and it's on page 49. Exodus, big, number 16, small, 11. We're going to read this chunk in this section, and we're going to see how the people of God are encouraged with God's provision of manna, and how this applies. Trust me, it comes back to this topic of the Sabbath, and of this setting aside a day to remember God's God, I'm not. Exodus 16, verse 11. I'm going to go ahead and start reading. If you're still getting there, just follow us along. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp. In the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer, I think it's about 6 pounds or so, for each person you have in your tent. And the Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some gathered little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell, and so Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, came and reported this to Moses. He commanded, tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to take and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. And so they saved it until morning, and as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is the Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. In 6 days you are to gather it, but on the seventh day the Sabbath there will not be any. Verse 27. We're almost done. Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath, Sabbath. That is why on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the seventh day. No one is to go out. So the people rested on the seventh day. God provides. I love how it starts off. It's like there was quail that night, covered the ground. I just imagine what that's like. Like, God, we're hungry. And he's like, okay. And then they walk out of their tents and there's just like tons of dead birds just laying all over the place. Like, oh, okay, I guess this is God's provision. And then they get up in the morning and it says the dew was there. Then the dew evaporated and there was this stuff that they could make bread out of. And enough where they could go and they could gather it most of the day and get 6 pounds worth of this like soft, flaky stuff and then make bread and eat that throughout the day. Manna literally comes from this word, literally meaning like, what? It's like, so I love the descriptive nature of the Bible sometimes. That, and God sent what? And so it was very, what they were experiencing, walking out of their tents, like, what? God has provided. But God is doing something here more than just giving them food. Because they were hungry. He did so to teach them a principle of what it meant to be his people set apart. He was preparing them ultimately to get where they needed to get. And not even ultimately, I should say. Potentially, temporarily there. And then Jesus. But just like when God gave his 10 commandments, it's not about 10 rules you must follow. But this is what it looks like to be my people. And he starts off right in the beginning by calling them for 6 days, go and gather. For 6 days, go and get it. Like, I put this out, but you got to go and get it by the end of the day, or you have no food to eat. He didn't say, like, it wasn't, what? Dropping from the top of their tent. Like, they just laid in bed, and they're like, and it just would fall into their mouths throughout the day. And then on the last day, they don't have to do that. They could just lay there. No, he said, for 6 days, get up and get moving. And I think for us to understand Sabbath at all, we have to understand the value of work that God sees. See, work is an opportunity given by God. Just like the manna was this offer, this gift of God, so is our opportunity to work. Work is a good thing. Working hard to provide for or to train your family, working hard to produce and to help others in our communities, accomplish something with our hands, our minds, our efforts, providing a service for others, doing so with integrity and effort is a good thing. The ultimate hope is not to do nothing, but it's to do something well. We were not made just to exist, but we were made to do for some of you that may not look the same, right? Maybe it's not the traditional efforts in the workforce. Maybe for you it's raising a child. Maybe for you it's loving and influencing others in your retirement. Maybe for you it's pursuing an education or training for that workforce eventually. Whatever that is, we are working. We're putting effort in. Those 6 days are important for us to understand the seventh. But that all of it is an opportunity for God. That the good things we get to do, we get to do them. We get to do works. We get to do efforts. We get to produce. But no matter how many hours you put in, remember this, it's still manna. We need to see it and realize that we aren't making anything. We are just moving around the stuff that we've got. You hear me? Like a lot of times we're like, I made this, and I know I just used that wording, but whatever. But you know, I made this. you didn't make anything. You took a bunch of stuff that was there and you moved it around into a different shape is all you've done. And so God has given us the opportunity to work. God has given us the opportunity to produce and to bring into creation something beautiful, or bring out of creation something beautiful. So the way we view work radically shifts when we realize it's manna. We do it for a different reason now. That's why Paul can say this, and whatever you do, it's not like when you're at church or when you're around a Christian. It's like whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Amen. See, that's why we work. That's why we do the 6 days. It's to bring about the glory of God and to bring about the thanksgiving of God. How often do you take time on the train on the way to the city to say, thank you, God, for providing? Or do you say, oh, another ride, another day, another work for me to produce? How can you thank God for the opportunity to work hard? How are you allowing God to be glorified in your workplace? So I've been hearing some amazing stories about how people have been trying to seek out, what does it look like to live this Christian walk, this journey with Jesus in a unique way? What does it look like for me in my context? And I've been hearing a lot of cool side stories about this, and one specifically I want to share with you because I want to encourage you perhaps to consider something similar if your job offers it. Is our sister Mariah, the drummer here. I think she's up with the teenagers right now. But she has been looking for ways to not just share her faith with her friends and to just be the light, but she's already doing those wonderful intentional things, but also she's been working for this thing called an ERG or ERA, I think it is, but it's basically a club for her business. In her business, they offer these clubs, and she wants to use it as an opportunity to present the gospel, to share with others, to get others to pursue Christ, some fellowship of believers. And it's such a beautiful desire to say, hey, I want God to be glorified even at AIG. Like, it's not like God only belongs in the church building, God only belongs maybe in the street, but God doesn't belong in the business world. And it's like, no, he belongs everywhere. So how do I honor God as a teacher? How do I honor God as a business professional, as a doctor, a child care provider, a lawyer, a student, or a retired person? Perhaps for you this morning, it's how might my work be an opportunity to use what God has given me? Amen. Verse 19 and 20. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, and it was full of maggots and began to smell. I love the descriptive nature of that as well. And listen, he's like, listen, by the end of the day, you need to get rid of it. Eat it all or throw it out like it's just going to become maggot-filled and disgusting. See, the manna is provided. They go out and they gather it for that single day. No keeping it for more than a day. And of course, the people were like, well, let's double check. Here's what I see the first direct principle about Sabbath keeping. Hold to the fruit of your work with a loose grip. Hold the fruit of your work with a loose grip. Don't hang too tightly on the fruit of your work. Since God has provided the opportunity to work, we should enjoy the fruit of our work, but to do so with a loose grip. Jesus tells this story to make this same point. Someone came to him one day and yelled out in the crowd, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide his inheritance with me." And he responds by saying this. He says, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions." And then he tells a story about a certain rich man who had an abundant harvest, and he thought, what should I do with this? And he's like, I know what I'll do. I'll break down my barns. I'll build bigger barns, and I'll just relax because I'll have more than enough. Then he says, you have plenty of grain laid up for years. And God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And then Jesus principally draws this out. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Did you hear the standard? It's not about not having finances or not saving money. That is not the principle here. I've heard people say, this is why I don't have life insurance, because of this passage. I'm like, no! but anyway, so that is not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is being rich towards God should be our primary focus. It's about pursuing him with everything that we are. And if building bigger barns is what we're after, we're missing it completely. Amen? You see, he sets the standards. Don't work all your life to be rich for yourself while poor towards God. Don't just work to work. Do it with a greater purpose. And the result of that, hold with a loose hand to allow it to do more for God's purposes. That's why Paul says also, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Notice, love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith. See how this is very much like the puffer fish? It's okay to get money and have a good job. He's like, eager for money. Those that are eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. The love of money is the root of that evil. That desire for that status, that ability to have more, to build more barns, to get more cars, to get a nicer polish, to have more stuff. Each day God would provide. And each day they would eat only what they gathered. Except one day they were to collect twice the amount on the sixth day and hold that throughout the next day. And miraculously, the food suddenly didn't spoil one day a week. I love people that try to bring like naturalistic explanations to these things. They're like, well, this is probably this plant that blew through the desert and just happened to fall all around Israel, each morning as they prayed. And then it just happened to happen. And then it just happened one day a week. And the sixth day of the week, it just didn't go bad that one day. Maybe they figured out refrigeration. Or maybe there is a God. So miraculously, the food would not spoil that day because God was communicating something. See, God doesn't just do miracles. We've talked about this. God doesn't just do miracles for miracle's sake, but he does it to communicate some greater truths. And it's, if you truly trust me to provide for the 6 days, then you could trust me with the seventh while you slow down. Sabbath is a release of control to trust the one who is in control. Did you hear me? Sabbath is a release of control to trust the one in control. This is the heart of Sabbath. I don't need to be in charge. God's got this. See, as a spiritual habit, it's taking a day every week and saying this. Yes, there's work to be accomplished, but instead I'm going to release control to him. Don't be like the Israelites who decided to walk around and start to look around for it anyway. Even when God said, trust me. It is practicing the reality that there is a God who has provided for my 6 days. There is a God who has given me the fruit of this labor, and now I will allow myself to stop in my efforts. To stop. Slow down. Because why? We talked about this. God is God. I'm not. Have you considered I need a day to not work? Not simply to do something else. Not even just to rest for the rhythms of our body, but because some will say, I'm strong enough. But it is to communicate, I'm not in control of all this, and that's okay. You hear me? I'm not in control, and that's okay. So maybe for you this morning, there's something you feel the need to control, something you say, I must. Let me say, Sabbath, rest. Rest from the attempt to control your life. Rest from the race to have your neighbor, what your neighbor has. Rest from the comparison game you're playing with other people. Rest from the fact that you cannot make your kids perfect. Rest from the fear that what the country could become if we rest. Right? You've convinced yourself you're indispensable. You need Sabbath. Man, I could not have preached this message when I first started ministry. I wouldn't have told you then, but I was indispensable. If somebody called me, no matter the day, no matter the night, no matter the time, no matter what was going on, I had to be there. Two years of ministry. I went week after week, sometimes never taking a day off for maybe a month or two. have to be convinced. Well, I'm honoring God by using what he's given me. I'm indispensable to his work in some way. Again, I wouldn't say that out loud. But there was a moment I realized, hey, Scott, you're not that important. Who needs to hear that about themselves, not just me? About themselves. You're not that important. And by that, I don't mean important to God or valuable or any of that stuff, but in order to make the earth spin, you don't have to put your hands to it every moment. You're not keeping the earth spinning. God's got that. He's got it. Do you need to release that control? Do you think you're the one keeping the earth moving? Then maybe you have to take your hand off the ground, off your phone, off your email, off your job, and let God be God. I want to jump to this. There's an opportunity to celebrate the Sabbath. I want you to look at Psalm 92 at some point this week. If you have time, look at Psalm 92 and see what this psalm of praise and adoration and celebration of God is about the Sabbath. Because in the very beginning, you might miss it. It's like in italics usually at the top, right above the passage, it says a psalm of Sabbath. And so he begins and he celebrates God for who he is. And so we recognize that Sabbath is an opportunity to celebrate and to recognize what God has done and who God is. But I want you to hear this final thought. Because there's a lot that we could do with Sabbath. And it's a beautiful thing, but we have to understand why is Sabbath, or what is Sabbath, and what it is not. In Colossians chapter 2, it describes Sabbath and our approach as New Testament believers, as those that have trusted Christ's work. It says, therefore, don't let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. See, these are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. The imagery here is, I've drawn this out before, and I ask for your patience with this, but the imagery here is almost like a small child in a sandbox. And I picture this small child sitting in a sandbox, playing along all by themselves, and mommy or daddy begins to approach. And as they approach, their shadow is cast out before them. And as they approach this child closer and closer and closer, the shadow is seen clearer and clearer and clearer. And at first, maybe it's just a cloud, or maybe it's just something moving by. But as that shadow is cast out in front of the child, there's a point in which it goes from just being a blurb to actually starting to form the view of a person. And when they look out, that child is looking out at the shadow. That shadow turns in us the desire to turn towards the Father and say, you're here. All along, the whole reason for Sabbath was to look at the shadow and realize there's something even better. We rest each week because we know we've got a better rest to come. Amen. Because the reality is what? Found in Christ. We know from Hebrews chapter 4 that guess what? Today we have a Sabbath rest. That this whole idea of working 6 days, and even in Israel they had like 6 years and then rest on the 7th year, and all of these patterns and these rhythms were to just say it's not about legalism, about making sure only, and making sure you have all these laws set up around it. He's saying, listen, look for Christ. Because for the 6 days, for the days leading up to Jesus, there was an attempt for effort. Working with God. And then coming to the end of ourselves at the 6th day and saying, God, I can't do any more. And it's there on the Sabbath that Christ approaches him and is there. And Christ says, I've been with you since day one. Day 1 was manna. Day 2 was manna. Day 3 was manna. Day 4 was manna. Day 5 was manna. Day 6 was manna. Now day 7, you'll rest and understand that all along it's been manna. And so on a beautiful level, when we go through these rhythms in our lives and we communicate these things, we communicate in our lives the gospel of Jesus Christ. That though we are weak, he is strong. Though we can't accomplish enough in 6 days, he is God and we're not. And guess what? That's a good place to be. To trust our God, to be God, and not try to take control on that. Amen? Please stand with me to pray. Holy Father, I ask that there's something this morning that's been said that has challenged us to the soul. Perhaps for some of us it's the way we view work, or some of us the way we view our control, our need to control. God, I ask that we leave desiring Sabbath in some way. Whether that's building that into a weekly pattern as we ought to, Lord, or if it's releasing control of that thing that I need to produce. I need to be involved. And to trust God to do what he alone can do. God, we trust you to do what you alone can do. Let us rest in you. Let us Sabbath in you. Let us know that you are God and we are not. God, I ask that we are comfortable in your presence. And that we are restful in you. I pray for those that are here this morning that have not experienced that ultimate, beautiful rest that you provide. I ask you might whisper into their hearts